All right, so we got SAT prep week number 3. Here we go. Of course, by all means, feel free to come off mute, ask a question, type it in the chat. I will definitely be checking both of them frequently. How do you register for the SAT? So for this, for the SAT, Simone, that you're going to be taking in April, you do not have to do anything with registering. The school will take care of that. Now, if you're taking it on your own, then you would go to collegeboard.org, and that would take you through registration, where you would take the test, so on and so forth. But for the SAT that's in April, you do not have to worry about anything related to registration. The school will take care of that. So hopefully that answers your question. If that answer is not good enough, let me know. All right, so Heart of Algebra. Heart of Algebra is primarily Algebra 1, but does have some beginning Algebra 2 concepts. So for everyone in here, it's not that you don't know how to do it. Some of you may have just forgotten how to do it because you haven't had to do it in such a long time. So solving a straightforward linear equation. So hey, you can have a 6x plus 5 equals 2x minus 7. Solve it. Could get a question just like that. Solving with real world situations. Graphs of linear equations. So remember slope, you have rise over run. And y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Of course, you have y equals mx plus b, and then y minus y1, m parentheses x minus x1. So remember the formulas that you would use for linear equations. Those are still valid. Solving a system, either using substitution, elimination, or using word problems. And then solving inequalities. So that's your less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So again, most of these are those primary concepts that come from Algebra 1. Primary things that you would have learned back in Algebra 1 or at the beginning of your Algebra 2 trig class. Again, if there are some of you in here that are in pre-calc or calculus, again, you work with a linear equation quite a bit, so most of it is probably just basic review for you, but a lot of the SAT focuses on linear, lots of lines. So, any questions before we continue forward? All right, not seeing and hearing any, so it sounds like everyone's good. So let's look at a couple of problems just to get our feet wet with what some of these type of SAT problems would look like. So those of you, so this document was already posted to Google Classroom. So those of you who are able to just pull it up on your Chromebook, feel free to do so. For those of you who are using a device that is not a Chromebook, I will do my best to try to make the document as clear for you. Just know that that might not necessarily be possible, unfortunately. So before you do the practice yourself, let's look at a couple of problems together. So for those of you who have it pulled up on your device, I'm at the last 2 pages. We're going to look at some questions together. So, problem 1. So problem 1 here is an example of a no calculator problem. So if A comma B is the solution of the system of equations shown above, what is the value of A and B? What is the value of A and B? So they're telling you that A and B are integers. So if it's an integer, that means not a decimal, not a fraction. That's what an integer means, not a decimal, not a fraction. So remember, a system of equations is you're working with two lines. Those two lines, when those two lines meet, that is where your solution is. So you have a line there, you have a line there. Where they meet is right there. So since they meet right there, that will tell you what that answer should be. So we have to figure out what that ordered pair is going to be. Look at your graph. Notice that it's counting by twos. 2, 4, 6, 8. That's how they got the 10. So when we're counting, just know that we're counting by twos. That's -2, -4, -6, -2, -4, -6. So -6, -6. So that's what that point is. -6, -6. Any questions so far? All right. Now notice, -6, -6 doesn't show up anywhere as an answer. That's because that's not what they were asking you for. What they were asking you for was A plus B. So they told you that this point represents A and B. So that means A is -6 and B is -6. -6 plus -6 gives you -12. So they gave you an equation that looks relatively harmless. Looks like a pretty simple problem, and they added a wrinkle to it. That's what SAT questions are. It's a standard problem with a little bit of something added on the end. So just be careful. You got to be careful with those type of problems. So again, that's an example of a no calculator problem. Fairly easy to handle. The calculation is not that bad. So, any questions before we continue? Before we look at a calculator problem. Alrighty then let's look at a calculator problem before we do some practice together. Before you do some practice. So, notice in this case, so we're going to look at problem 31. So for the book that I used for this SAT packet today, they have calculators next to the problem where you would be using a calculator. So a store breaks even when its sales equals its expenses. John has just opened a new surfboard store at the beach. He buys each surfboard wholesale for $80 and has fixed monthly expenses of $3,600. He sells each surfboard for $120. How many surfboards does John need to sell in a month to break even? So again, it's a word problem based, but it's going to require you to set up an equation. So again, read it once to see what the problem's talking about. Now we're going to read it again to actually set everything up. So a store breaks even when its sales equal its expenses. So what you sell equals what you spend. What you sell equals what you spend. John opened a new surfboard store at the beach. He buys each surfboard wholesale for $80. So when you buy it, that's money that you had to spend. You're buying something, you're spending money. So he buys a surfboard for $80. We don't know how many he bought, so that's our variable. $80 times the number of surfboards he bought. And he has fixed monthly expenses of $3,600. So a fixed expense is something that he's going to have to spend no matter what. So that's like rent, that's like mortgage, that's like a car payment. He's going to have to spend that no matter what. He's got to spend that no matter what. Plus 3,600. So that's all the money that he has to spend. He sells the surfboard for $120. So now we're talking about how much he's making. How much he's making. So 120 times, we don't know how many surfboards he's going to sell. So that's X. So that represents how much he's going to sell. We good so far? Anybody stuck, confused, etc. Before we finish off this problem? All right. So remember, however much he sells has to equal however much he spent. So we're going to take these two parts and set them equal to each other. Equals 120x. So we have our equation. Now we can solve it. So subtract 80x. That's 3,600 equals 40x. And then divide by 40. So that gives you 90. So that's the algebraic way of doing it. Now you could have always used guess and check. You can always use guess and check for a problem like that. Now that might take a little longer depending on what you're doing. So if I was going to use guess and check for this problem, first you start with something that you think makes sense. So I'm going to use 30. So he buys each surfboard for $80. So that's 80 times 30, which is 2,400. And he has fixed monthly expenses. So that's 3,600. That's $6,000. So again, we're doing guess and check here. Now we still use 30 for the amount that he sold. If you take 120 times 30, that gives you 3,600. Those aren't equal. And remember, how much he sells has to equal how much he spent. So since those aren't equal, 30 doesn't work. That means you'd have to try another number. So again, if you wanted to use guess and check for this particular problem, you could. Just know that if you're not dead on with that first one, you're going to have to try another one. So, but guess and check will work if you wish to do it that way. Anybody have any questions on that second example before you get into some practice yourself? All right, so let's actually get into some have you get into some practice. So in a moment, I'm going to have you get into a little bit of practice with it. So we're going to do 2 rounds of practice. We're going to do a no calculator practice, and we're going to do a calculator practice. So check it out here. You're going to be doing 8 practice questions. So you're going to do 8 no calculator questions. You're going to get 12 minutes to do it. So that's a typo up here. So you have 8 questions. You're going to have 12 minutes. I'll time you to keep you accountable with the time. After that, you're going to have 7 questions. So you have 7 questions with 12 minutes as well. So 15 total questions. So the goal you should be shooting for here is the number 9. The goal is the number 9 here. So 9 out of the 15 questions would be similar to getting the average score for the for the math section of the SAT. So we're shooting to get 9 of these 15 questions correct. So for those of you who aren't using a Chromebook, I will try my best to put all of the questions on the screen so that you can see them. They may not be of the best quality, but I'm going to do my best to try to get them on the screen for you. Again, I'll be keeping your time. We'll do one no calculator section, one calculator section, go through the answers, talk about a few problems, and then it'll be time to close up shop. Any questions by anybody before we get started? All right. Yes, I will.
All right.
No problem. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the no calculator practice. So again, I'm gonna try to fit the problems onto the screen for those of you who are not using a Chromebook. So the problems are on the screen. Those of you who have the document pulled up, just work from the document itself. So we're gonna take 12 minutes to do the 8 questions here, and your time starts now. All right, so turn the recorder back on here. So for the no calculator section, so these are the answers for the no calculator problems. So for problem 1, your answer should have been D. For problem 2, your answer was B. For problem 6 on the right, the answer was D. For number 4, the answer was B. For number 8, the answer was A. For the gridded problems, 16, the answer was 8. For 18, the answer was 8. And for 19, the answer was 0. So those are the answers for the no calculator section. We'll switch over to the calculator section. So for the calculator section, number 4, the answer was C. Number 11, the answer was A. For number 5, the answer was C. For number 17, the answer was A. And then for the gridded problems, for problem 31, the answer was 10. For 32, the answer was 2/5. And for number 34, the answer was 105. So that's the answers for all 15 problems. Again, if you got at least 9 of them right, then you're basically hitting that average marker that you would get for the average score on the SAT. So let's take the remaining bit of time that we have. We have about 10 minutes left with each other. If you have any questions that you want to go over, now's the time to ask. Let's see, can you scroll up to 1, 6, and 2 on the no calc? Sure, I can do that, Jackson. Here, so 1, 2, there you go, 1, 2, and 6. All right, so we got, yes, go ahead, Justin. $31. All right, we can do that. Jackson, were you finished with 1, 2, and 6 here? All right, so let's go to 31 on the calculator section. So a group of friends decided to divide the $800 cost of a trip equally among themselves. When 2 of the friends decided not to go on the trip, those remaining were still divided the $800 equally, but each friend's share increased by $20. how many friends were originally in the group. So this is a problem that I would strongly recommend guess and check, because it would definitely be a little bit harder to get the equation set up and then start solving it. So what I would do is pick a number that is going to work. Pick a number that you feel would work out. I'm always a person that's going to start out with whole numbers. So we're going to start out with 10. So 800 divided by 10 gives you $80. So if I originally had 10 friends that went, they're going to pay $80 each. The problem goes on to say, when 2 of the friends decided not to go, so instead of 10 friends, you have 8. If I still divide 800 divided by 8, that gives me $100, which is between 80 and 100. That's a $20 difference. And that's actually what I needed. So the original amount of friends that I had going on this trip was 10. So sometimes it does work out for you to use guess and check. In this case, it just so happens that I guessed 10 and I got the guess dead on the nose. That's not going to happen all the time, but guess and check will definitely work out. Let's see, 819 on the no-calc. So let's go there. All right, so looking first at number 8. Which of the following equations represents a line that is parallel? So remember, when you have a parallel line, so parallel lines means you have to have the same slope. So the slope has to be the same. So for y equals negative 3x plus 4, the slope is negative 3. So you have to figure out with these 4 equations, which one has a slope of negative 3. Now notice that all of these equations are in standard form. So if you're in standard form, there are 2 things that you're going to have to, there's 1 of 2 ways for you to solve this problem. Either A, rewrite into y equals mx plus b, or the shortcut that you can use for standard form, the slope is equal to the opposite of A over B. So A is the number in front of X, B is the number in front of Y. So if you look at choice A, you have 6 and you have 2. So the slope is the opposite of the number in front of, the opposite of the A value, which is 6, divided by 2, negative 3. So that's your equation. Now, if you chose to rewrite it because I don't want to be bothered with the shortcut, which is perfectly fine, subtract 6x on both sides. 2y equals negative 6x plus 15. Then divide everything by 2. Y equals negative 3x plus 15 over 2. So your slope is still negative 3. Either way it goes, it still works out. And let's see here, you wanted 19, so let's go to 19. So 19, x comma y is the solution. What is the value of x? So for this particular problem, since you have a system, since you are looking for x, then that means we really don't care about y. Hence, get rid of it. If we don't care about y, then why does it need to be in this problem? Get rid of it. So we have a 3 and we have a 4. To get rid of it, we can either solve this using substitution or elimination. So it all depends on which one you're comfortable with. I'm going to solve this using elimination. So there's nothing times 3 that will give me 4, but I can take the top equation, multiply it times 3, the bottom equation, multiply it times negative 4 to get them to drop out. So ultimately, I want them to drop out. So if we do that, that gives us negative 9x plus 12y equals 60. Negative 24x minus 12y equals negative 60. Since the y's are opposites, they will drop out. So you get negative 33x equals 60 plus negative 60 is 0. So if you divide them out, x equals 0. So for a system, remember there are two ways for you to do it, substitution or elimination. They won't tell you on the SAT which one to use. That's more so personal preference. So you're on your own accord for that one. So I know we got a couple more minutes left before we close up shop. Does anyone have a question or two that they want to ask before we close up shop? All right, doesn't look like I'm seeing any or hearing. Oh, no, a second. We got Aiden trying to tell me. Can we go over to number 17 on the calculator section? Yep, we can do that. Number 17. All right. The equation above models the total cost Y that a company charges a customer to rent a truck for 1 day and drive the truck X miles. The total cost consists of a flat fee plus a charge per mile driven. When the equation is graphed in the XY plane, what does the y-intercept of the graph represent? So when you are graphing, you have y-axis, x-axis. So a y-intercept is a point on the graph where x is equal to 0. So this is 0, comma, some number. When you graph a line on, draw a line on a graph. So if you were to make x equal to 0, 1999 plus 150 times 0, so anything times 0 is 0, and that gives you 1999. Remember, your flat fee came first, so your flat fee is $19.99, meaning if you don't drive this truck at all, if you never drive this truck, you're still going to have to pay $19.99. So they want to. So that problem is simply trying to see, do you know what a y-intercept means? Simply what that problem is trying to ask you. No problem, Aiden. So, all right, just like for everyone, I'm gonna make sure I honor your time here. So just as Sophia had asked and / confirmed, I will upload this to Google Classroom for you to watch and to use as you need it. The answers will also be up there as well. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions or anything that I can do for you and whatnot. If there aren't any other questions, then you all have been good. I appreciate that. A 13 out of 15 Jackson would be right in that 700 range. Right in that 700 range for a 13 out of 15. So those of you that have questions, I'll stick around for a few moments. Otherwise, y'all have yourselves a great rest of your week, and I will see you all next week.